They told us it was just an experiment. They said it was nothing more than a test of the ionosphere, just a harmless way to understand the weather better. But I should have known better. I should have known when the first rain dropped upward. It started in the small town of Fairview, a place you'd forget in a second if you didn't live there. Nestled between mountains, thick with forests and wide open skies. The kind of place that made you feel like you were living in a postcard, but nothing ever happened. Nothing that mattered, anyway. Then the government showed up. And with them came a strange new project, something called HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. At least, that's what the brochures called it. They said it was going to study the ionosphere, to understand how to predict weather, mitigate climate effects, and, most importantly, improve communication systems. They told us the program would be good for the environment, good for the world. But they didn't mention what it would do to the sky. It was a Friday afternoon when the first odd thing happened. The air turned heavy, not humid, just thick. You could taste the metallic edge to it. The kind of air that makes your skin tingle, like static before a thunderstorm. But there was no storm. No warning. No clouds. We thought it was just another anomaly, another strange side effect of the government experiment. Nothing to be worried about. I mean, they were the experts. What could possibly go wrong? That night, I saw the first drop of rain fall upward. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. I was sitting on my porch, staring out into the open sky, when the rain started to fall. Only it didn't fall. It shot straight up, swirling like smoke caught in reverse. The water didn't splash. It rose into the air as if the sky itself was pulling it up. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to feel. I stood there, frozen, watching the unnatural rain loop in the air. The birds, stupid, small birds, started to fly in the wrong direction, too. They didn't just fly south for the night. They flew up, higher than I'd ever seen them fly before. Then, just like that, they vanished into the clouds. I tried to tell someone the next day. Anyone. But no one believed me. At first, people just laughed. They thought I was overworked. The heat, the humidity, it had all gotten to my head. But I knew what I saw. I wasn't the only one who noticed something wrong. A farmer's cow went missing that afternoon. No signs of a struggle, no hoof prints, nothing. Just gone. Into the sky. Then the weather started acting differently. It wasn't just the rain anymore. Temperatures started fluctuating wildly. 1 minute it would be freezing, the next sweltering hot. No consistency. No pattern. The satellite data, the meteorological reports, they all showed something strange. A disturbance. An electromagnetic pulse in the sky, centered right over Fairview. But they didn't shut the project down. They didn't halt the experiment. No one even acknowledged what was happening. That's when I realized they knew. It wasn't long before the animals started acting strange. The birds kept flying up, not down, like they were drawn by something in the sky. I saw a hawk fly straight into a cloud, only to disappear. No feathers, no wind, just gone. The weather kept getting worse. And then on the fourth day, things really started to break. It was the storm that made me understand. It came out of nowhere, as if the sky had suddenly forgotten how to behave. The wind howled. Trees bent backward, like they were being pulled into the ground. The sky turned an unnatural green, swirling like an aurora. But not beautiful, just sickening. I was in the field when it hit. I didn't see it at first, the energy, the force, the suction. But it was there. You could feel it on the back of your neck, in your fingertips. The ground shook. I saw the lights flicker. The power grid failed. The hum in the air became a scream, a high-pitched noise that rattled the bones. And then the rain started to fall again. But this time, it didn't rise. It exploded. Shards of water, pieces of glass, broken drops fell from the sky. They didn't land gently. They shot down like shrapnel. Hundreds of them, sharp as knives, cutting into the ground and everything in their path. I ran. I ran so fast. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't natural. I made it to the barn and locked myself inside, watching through the slats of the door as the wind tore at the trees and the animals scattered. I wasn't the only one who saw the shift in the weather, but by then it was too late. When I tried to contact the authorities, they told me to stay inside. Stay safe. Wait for further instructions. The military was coming in, but I knew they wouldn't stop it. They had already opened Pandora's box. At least, that's what I thought. But then came the message. A voice on the radio, distorted but unmistakable. The sky has changed. The door is open. We are here. That's when I realized. The storm wasn't just a weather anomaly. It was a signal, a message, and it wasn't for us. The storm didn't end. The radio silence from the military grew deafening, and the government's response? Non-existent. No helicopters, no rescue teams, no press briefings. It was like they had simply stopped acknowledging the disaster unfolding right over their heads. The town of Fairview was left alone, abandoned in a spiraling chaos that no one wanted to explain. I went to the government facility the next day. I shouldn't have, but I had to. By the time I arrived, the gate was locked. Guards stood at attention, but they didn't seem to notice the madness outside their perimeter. One soldier tried to stop me from entering the compound. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me with hollow, almost glazed eyes. But I pushed through. What happened out there? I demanded. He blinked twice and then turned away, muttering under his breath. We were told to stay inside. The storm was a mistake. I grabbed his arm, desperate for answers. A mistake? How does something like this happen? His face twitched. His pupils dilated, and the tension in his body seemed to snap like a taut wire. It wasn't a mistake. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost lost under the sound of the wind. It was meant to happen. And then he walked away, leaving me standing there, baffled and more afraid than ever. His words didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. I turned back to the gate, but the signs outside the facility had changed. They weren't just warnings about weather anomalies or experimental testing zones anymore. Now they read, "Do not enter. Area is secured for controlled environmental conditions." And beneath that, something new, something unlisted in any public records. Weather participant warning. I shivered. I was standing at the precipice of something much darker than a botched experiment. I could feel it. That night, I found something that terrified me more than anything I had experienced so far. Anomalous footage. A grainy video clip appeared on a local news channel out of nowhere. It wasn't even from a station in our region. It was an emergency broadcast, intercepted and tagged with a timestamp from the facility. The video was shaky at first, but the scene became clear. Fairview's main street, deserted and covered in layers of dust and debris. But it wasn't the debris that caught my attention. It was the birds. Hundreds of them, hanging in midair, as if frozen in time. They weren't moving. No wind. No flapping of wings. Just suspended in place, hovering like something in a vacuum. The camera zoomed out, and there, standing at the center of the street, was a single man, Dr. John Marshall, the lead physicist from the project. His face was frozen, like he was caught in a trance. He wasn't talking, but his lips were moving in a slow, unnatural rhythm. He was whispering. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see his eyes. Wide. Empty. Unblinking. He was looking at the sky. And then, with horror that I couldn't explain, I saw something. A shadow in the sky. The birds were moving now. Not flying, they were falling, pulled down, and yet not touching the ground. They didn't crash. They didn't break apart. They just disappeared, one by one. And as they did, something moved with them. An energy, a tug, a pull, like an invisible string drawing them to a place unseen. And at the last frame, the broadcast cut out. The screen went black. No power surge. No signal failure. Just static. I stayed awake for the next 48 hours. The radio was useless, no answers. The military was still quiet. I couldn't get any clear information from anyone. It was like we were trapped in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the next unexplainable thing to happen. Then, at 3 a.m., I heard it. A hum. Faint at first, then louder. Like something was charging, growing. It was coming from outside. From the sky. I ran outside to the porch, my heart hammering. The wind had picked up again. But this time, it wasn't just the sound of the storm. It was something else. Something unnatural. I looked up. There, above the town, the clouds had started to shift. Not in a normal way. They were twisting, as if something was moving through them, something pulling and stretching the sky itself. And there, caught in the swirling mass, the sun. But it wasn't normal. The light was wrong. The shadows bent in odd ways. The sun didn't shine down. It rippled, like it was underwater.
I heard a sound then.
Not from the sky, but from inside my own head. It spoke. Not in language, not in a voice, but in rhythm. A pulse that felt like it was vibrating through the air and into my bones. I ran inside, but it followed me. The hum. It stayed with me for hours. Constant. In the days that followed, everything started to break. Phones stopped working. Emails went unanswered. The equipment at the facility, no matter how isolated, began to malfunction. Instruments that shouldn't have been connected to any external network began picking up strange frequencies. Signals that couldn't be explained. And then the birds came back. But they weren't the same. They didn't just fly. They were drawn. They weren't hunting. They were following us. They circled the buildings, hovering like an army waiting for a command. I realized they weren't flying anymore. They were waiting for the signal. But the signal wasn't from the sky anymore. It was coming from within us. Our own memories. The moment we stopped doubting, we all began to hear the same hum. It wasn't the sky anymore. It was inside us. By the third week, the news of the weather anomaly had been buried under reports of natural disasters elsewhere. Earthquakes, hurricanes, the usual disasters. But Fairview? No one seemed to care. The government had buried the truth, and the military kept their distance. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't ignore the whispers that seemed to follow me. The way the world had shifted so suddenly, so violently, without warning. It wasn't just the animals anymore. It wasn't just the birds or the people. It was the entire environment. The air had changed.
The soil had changed.
Even the trees seemed to twitch when you walked by. That's when I realized it. The experiment, HAARP, hadn't just altered the weather. It had altered everything. The entire ecosystem was adjusting, responding to the signal it had triggered. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the beginning of something far worse. The rhythm of the storm had infected everything. The trees, the animals, even the ground beneath our feet. Every living thing was echoing it. And now we were part of it. By now, there were only a few of us left in Fairview. Most of the residents had either fled or been taken. Some of the people who had remained behind had started acting strange, mumbling incoherent phrases, looking up at the sky as though they were listening to something. They weren't just afraid. They were entranced. But it wasn't the sky that was calling anymore. It was the signal, the hum. I first noticed it in the trees. They started growing differently, their roots pushing out of the soil like fingers digging into the earth. But it wasn't for nutrients. No, they were searching, pulling something or someone closer. By the time I reached the center of the town, it was impossible to ignore. The humming had grown louder. It wasn't a noise. It was a frequency vibrating in your chest, in your very bones. The world around me started to distort. The buildings seemed to warp, their edges becoming soft, like heat haze. Even the ground beneath my feet shifted, subtly, like it wasn't stable anymore. I saw the first signs of what was happening to the people. They weren't just staring into the sky anymore. They were reaching for it. They were changing. Their eyes glowed faintly, like they were being pulled somewhere. I managed to make it to the facility, the place where it all started. The place I had avoided because I knew something inside was wrong. I didn't want to go back there, but I had no choice. The door opened with a low creak. Inside, everything was as it had been when I left, except for one thing. The air felt thick,
like it was pressing down on me.
I walked down the hallway, and the hum grew louder. I could feel it vibrating through the walls, through the floor. And then I heard it, The same voice I had heard in my sleep. "We are here, waiting
For you.
I froze. The voice wasn't just coming from a speaker. It wasn't coming from anywhere external.
It was inside me.
I walked toward the control room. It was empty. No one was there. But I could hear the hum, clearer now. It was saturating the air. My fingers shook as I pulled up the data logs. The readings were all wrong. The weather data was impossible. The pressure systems were fluctuating in ways that couldn't happen naturally. The barometric readings were spinning in circles. They were feeding back into themselves. That's when I saw it. The pattern. The data wasn't just analyzing the atmosphere. It was mapping it. Not just the weather. Everything. Every living thing. Every frequency. Every mind. The storm wasn't just a weather anomaly. It was collecting data. It was studying us. And as I scrolled through the files, I realized the truth. We weren't just affected by the storm. We were part of it. The experiment had opened a door to something else, something ancient. The ionosphere had been the key, but the signal wasn't from Earth. It was from something beyond it. It wasn't just the birds. It wasn't just the trees. It was everything. The storm had connected us to something. Something alive, something waiting. I knew the answer, and I didn't want to believe it. This wasn't just about weather control. This was about communication. The storm was talking to us, and we were listening.
But now
It was too late to shut it off. The moment I understood it, the lights flickered. And then the sky cracked. I looked out the window. The sky wasn't just storming anymore. It was unfolding, opening like a wound, splitting open to reveal something else. Something ancient. A mass of tendrils, shimmering, writhing in the storm's core. It wasn't a cloud. It was alive. And it was coming down. The sky was coming down to Earth. It wasn't just the weather that had changed. We had opened the door. And whatever had been waiting on the other side, it was finally here. The sky didn't just break, it collapsed. I watched, paralyzed, as the clouds twisted into something alive. The air around me thickened with pressure, like the world was being compressed from all sides. The roar of the storm grew louder, but it wasn't the wind anymore. It was something else, something alive, something sentient. I stumbled back from the window, but it didn't help. I could still feel it inside me. The hum, the whisper, the pull. It was coming from every direction, vibrating through the walls, through the ground, through the very air I breathed. It wasn't a storm anymore. It was a voice. I grabbed my comms device, but it was useless. The signal had been blocked. I couldn't reach anyone. The storm had interfered with every frequency, every channel. The world outside had become static. Then, the first of them appeared. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't a creature.
Not really.
It was more like a presence, a shadow inside the storm. A figure, moving within the violent winds, but not made of wind. Something solid, something that shouldn't have existed in our world. It was huge, massive, shifting, like a living dark cloud, with eyes. Eyes that seemed to burn through everything, like they could see right into the center of your soul. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in sound. It wasn't a language. It was a presence. A push against my mind, like my thoughts were being bent and twisted by something far older than the human race. I heard its message, and I didn't just hear it. I felt it inside me. We have waited. You have opened the door, and we will feed. The ground trembled beneath me. The walls cracked. And then, without warning, the first wave hit. It wasn't wind. It wasn't water. It was force. A wave of pure energy that seemed to come from the sky itself, hitting the ground like a tidal wave. But this wasn't the normal wave. This wasn't just water. It was light and shadow and sound, all colliding together. I could feel it tear at my skin, pulling at my thoughts, making me lose my sense of self, of reality. The air became thick with pressure, like I was trapped underwater. I could barely breathe, could barely think. My vision blurred, my body trembling. The walls around me seemed to bend, and I heard the screams, voices from nowhere. It wasn't the storm anymore. It was them. The creatures. The shadows. The entity. They were feeding off the world. And we were the nourishment. I made it to the door. Barely. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my vision slipping in and out of focus. The storm outside was no longer just a cloud. It had grown. Its dark tendrils reaching out, reaching for the world, for me, for everything. I heard it again. The voice. Inside my head. The door was never meant to be closed. We are the storm. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The words rang in my mind like a bell, like a pulse that I couldn't escape. It was so loud, so real, that I almost thought I could feel it in my chest, in my heart. I opened the door. Outside, the world was no longer the world I had known. It was shifting. The ground was uneven, cracked like the earth itself had split open. The sky was a swirling vortex of black and green, twisted and torn like some alien dimension was bleeding into ours. The air smelled wrong, like metal and decay. And the sound, it was deafening. It wasn't just wind. It was a constant hum, like machinery, but organic. Living. And the birds. Thousands of them. All falling upward. Not fluttering. Not migrating. They were being drawn. Drawn into the vortex. Into the storm. And then I saw them. The creatures. Not the rhinos. Not the animals. These were something else entirely. Humanoid figures. They were shifting in the air, moving through the storm like shadows. Their bodies were barely recognizable, twisted forms with eyes that burned like fire and limbs that didn't belong. They looked like people, but they weren't. They were too thin, too elongated, and their faces were wrong, stretching in unnatural ways. They were not just watching us. They were waiting for the storm to consume, for the world to be broken. I didn't know how much time passed. I didn't know if I was still awake, but I knew one thing. The world had changed, and it wasn't going back. I ran blindly through the wreckage. The air was too thick to breathe, too heavy to move. The storm had grown stronger, its tendrils reaching deeper, pulling more and more into the vortex. And still, I heard the voice. Not in words, not in language, but in feeling. We have waited. Now we take what is ours. I looked up, and I saw it. The thing, the entity, the storm. It was no longer just a weather anomaly. It was alive. Alive in a way that couldn't be stopped. Alive in a way that couldn't be understood. And in that moment, I realized the truth. We had done this. We had opened the door. And now, there was no closing it. The storm didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. It had become something more than weather, more than a natural force. It was an entity now, a presence in the sky that had broken free from its confinement, fed by the energy we had unleashed. The clouds swirled with the same unnerving, unnatural rhythm, and the air felt thicker, heavier, like something was pressing against it from above. The people who had stayed in Fairview, the last few who hadn't fled, were already changing. Their skin, their eyes, their expressions, everything about them had become distorted. They didn't speak in sentences anymore. They spoke in pulses, in rhythms, in frequencies, like they were speaking the same language as the storm. And then there were the others, the shadowed figures, the ones who had appeared in the sky in the storm. They weren't birds. They weren't animals. They were something else. Something that had come through the storm. I don't know when they started moving in. Maybe it was when the last drone feed went dark. Maybe it was when I looked out and saw them standing, staring in the streets. They didn't walk. They didn't run. They watched. And I knew they weren't just observers. They weren't part of this world anymore. They were the storm's manifestation. The entity had called them, called everyone, everything. I tried to reach the command center, but the roads were already blocked. The emergency radio frequencies were jammed. The hum, the low, constant hum, was everywhere now, in everything. It didn't matter what direction I ran. It didn't matter how far I went. The storm was always there, pressing in on all sides. I don't know how I made it back to the facility. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe the storm itself was pulling me there, guiding me to the center of it all. But when I entered the control room, I was too late. The others had already arrived. They weren't human anymore. Their faces were blank, shifting. Their eyes were glowing. Not like they were illuminated, but like they were absorbing light from the air itself. Their bodies weren't solid either. They seemed to bend, to distort like water, shifting constantly. They were the storm now. They were part of it. And when they turned to look at me, I didn't feel fear. Not the kind of fear I should have felt. I felt connected. Not to them. Not to the storm. But to the sky. The entity didn't speak in words anymore. It spoke in presence. In feeling. I heard it, but not with my ears. I heard it in my bones. The moment I understood it, I felt the pull. The deep, unsettling pull. It wasn't just in the air. It wasn't just in my mind. It was in the land. In the sky. In everything. We had opened the door. Not just to weather, but to something else. Something that had been waiting. The storm wasn't a random anomaly. It was alive. And now it had come to collect. To consume. I stepped forward. Without thinking. Without hesitation. Because I didn't need to understand it. I felt it. The world wasn't ending. It was transforming. The entity had already begun to alter everything. The trees, the land, the air, even the animals. The birds, no longer falling upward, had stopped moving altogether. They weren't flying anymore. They were waiting, watching. The storm had reached its peak. It wasn't about destruction. It was about integration. And as the winds picked up, as the last of the buildings crumbled around me, I felt my body change. I didn't know how, but I could feel it. My skin felt lighter. My eyes burned with the same light that had consumed the others. And I knew I was part of it now. The storm wasn't just in the sky anymore. It wasn't just in the land. It was inside me. It was in all of us. We had become the storm. We had become the language. And when the storm finally broke, the winds died down, the clouds dispersed, and the sun shone once more, it wasn't just the end of a weather event. It was the beginning of something new. The world didn't stop. But we did. We didn't need to speak anymore. We didn't need to think. Because we knew what was coming. And the sky had already spoken. It was never meant to be a warning. It was a message. And now, the world would have to listen.